Coming up next on Lumley Live, my interview with former CNN White House correspondent Dan Lothian on covering the Barack Obama administration and what he can tell us about the incoming president, Joseph R. Biden, plus how the news media has changed over the last decade. That's coming up next on Lumley Live.
It's time for Lumley Live, where history and politics collide.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, here's your host, a man who can name all 45 U.S. presidents while flying an airplane and chewing gum at the same time. Jim Lumley.
Stand by in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Lumley Live. Today my guest is Dan Lothian. Dan is the former White House correspondent with CNN. He was there from 2008 to 2013. He traveled on Air Force One with President Obama to over 30 countries. Before that, Dan was the Boston bureau chief at CNN. Before that, correspondent with the NBC Nightly News for 7 years out in Los Angeles. But now he's a professor at the School of Journalism at Northeastern University in Boston, the founder of Little Park Media. Dan is an avid runner, husband and father, and in full disclosure, he's a very close friend of mine now for 37 years. Welcome, Dan.
It's a pleasure to be here. 37 years. Wow, I feel old.
But you look good.
I'm trying.
Remember when we were in college, the professor kept telling me, Lumley, you've got a face for radio.
Although it's different these days, radio guys do video as well, right? So now it's multimedia, but back in the day, radio was radio, TV was TV.
Well, how did I do on your introduction here, your bio?
You did a great job. You hit all the major points, and it's been quite a career, and it's great to hear it reel back.
Well, what we want to talk about today is tomorrow we're going to have an inauguration, the 59th inaugural of the 46th President of the United States, former Vice President Joseph Biden. You know him and his wife, Jill, and we'll talk about that here in a few moments. But let's kind of harken back to our days in radio at college, and this is kind of what got you into this journalism business, but you actually had your first radio gig at age 16.
That's right. I grew up in the Tampa, St. Pete area down in Florida, and my dad was in radio. It was probably, I think, his third career. He loved radio and was working at a radio station there, and the owner saw me hanging out at this radio station quite a bit and said, if Dan's interested in this, we ought to get him his third-class license, which you needed at the time to go on the air. So get him studying for that, and then maybe he could fill in during the summers. I did study for the license, but never took it because they did away with it by the time I got ready to take it. You only needed the first-class license if you were an engineer. I was ready to go, and a guy who worked the overnight shift was roller skating with his kids. He fell, broke both his legs, and they called me up and said, "You're on," and I haven't stopped since.
Wow. From there to CNN White House correspondent, traveling on Air Force One with the president. I remember one day you called me. I answered. I said, "What are you doing?" You said, "I'm on Air Force One at Andrews and we're getting ready for takeoff." I think my response was, "I hate you, Dan."
It is one of those things where, very few people can say they've been on Air Force One. And it was quite an honor to be on that plane. And in fact, to be on it several times. And I remember the first time I was just pinching myself and just thinking back over my life and saying, how did I end up here? So you don't really, you get used to it after a while. It becomes another mode of transportation. But when you're sitting on that plane and the president comes back, or, the president's just around the wall from where you're sitting, it does make you realize how it's a special moment and how blessed you are.
Wow. So what was it like for those years as a White House correspondent with CNN, covering the president, covering Washington, D.C.?
Well, it was challenging. It was exciting, certainly exhilarating, but quite challenging. And the reason for that was that the president was on a mission, right? He wanted to go around the world and rebuild the trust with, especially the Arab world. And there were a lot of places that he wanted to visit and really kind of introduce or reintroduce the global stage to the United States. There had been a lot of tensions after a series of conflicts. And so the president wanted to kind of come out with 2.0 in his mind. I think the challenge for us as a press corps following the president was trying to become an expert on all these different places that the president was going. It was this quick study, and what would happen, most people don't realize this, but these large briefing books are put together. It's provided by the White House researchers. They give you some information about the places you're going to, but we also have a big producing staff that puts together these large books with anything that you can imagine, useful information and just trivial information that might be interesting. It might be something you can say in a live shot or pose as part of a question. And so you are studying, it's like a crash course for a final exam on all of these trips. And each leg, you're going through your briefing book and you're memorizing a lot of information so that you can know what you're talking about when you land and you have to do a live shot.
Wow. And you traveled literally on Air Force One all over the world to over 30 countries.
That's right. I mean, some of it was on Air Force One. Some of it was most of it was on these charter planes. They don't do that as much now. But what typically had happened for quite a while, and for reporters covering the White House, is that there is this charter plane, usually a 747 by either Delta or United. These are special planes that are outfitted with really nice seats throughout. And we would travel on, that's where the bulk of the press corps would travel, usually leaving before the president so we could be on the ground when the president arrived, and then departing after the president already departed. So that's how the bulk of the media got around on these trips, and only a small group they called a pool, which represented the different agencies that covered the White House. So for example, there'd be a radio reporter, or there'd be a TV reporter or producer, one camera, one sound person, there'd be a magazine person, a newspaper person. So only a handful, roughly 12 representatives of the press corps would travel at any given time on Air Force One on a rotation. And then you would have to transmit out the information of what happened, when the president came back and talked to you. It wheels up, wheels down, any movement that was happening, that was up to the pool reporter, the pool reps to do that.
So you would just drive up to Joint Base Andrews, show your ID, and pull right up to where the airplane was waiting, right?
That's right. We would get picked up by car, taken there, because we would be gone for long periods of time. So the security was quite tight, obviously, as it always is on a base. We would get dropped off in this area, which was not where it probably was, about, I don't know, maybe a mile away from the actual hangar area, or the seating area where you'd go through security and so forth, and so in the lounge area. And you would get dropped off, and then a bus would shuttle us out to where we would go through security. They wouldn't check all your bags, but you had to, the typical stuff. We all had hard passes, right? So we were almost, in a sense, within a bubble, generally speaking, but they did do some security checks in there. Then you would sit at the gate and wait for time to board either the charter or Air Force One, and then another bus would take you out to the airplane, and that's where you get at that point, you get on the plane.
Wow. How would you describe President Obama? What kind of man was he? Was he shy? There's the time when the cameras are on, but then there's behind the scenes. Obviously, he knew you and your whole family on first name basis. I remember when former President George H.W. Bush called me by my first name when I flew him on the corporate jet several times. It just gave me goosebumps. But who was Barack Obama in your opinion?
Well, I know only as much as he has allowed us to know, right? And so I've never been, hanging out with him on the weekend, at his home in Chicago, and to get a real sense of who he was. But certainly I was closer than most people have gotten to him on a regular basis. And the president I saw was someone who really didn't trust a whole lot of people beyond this very tight inner circle. And by trust, I don't mean that like in a negative way, but he was very comfortable around people like Valerie Jarrett and a handful of others that he would hang out with. And then he had a broader circle beyond that of advisors and a couple of members of the press that he liked, that he would have meetings with from time to time. But I think generally speaking, President Obama is a cerebral person, very good out on the campaign trail, in terms of what they say, kissing the babies and so forth on the campaign trail, delivering powerful speeches that could really captivate an audience. But I think in private, he was someone who just liked to kick back, loved to study and read a lot. That was really his comfort zone, not necessarily out there with the crowds around him.
Our mutual friend, Mark Curtin, lawyer friend out of Dallas, he often described Barack Obama as the professorial president, almost in the vein of a Woodrow Wilson.
He was very well read, very, very smart, obviously. And I think sometimes that may have gotten in the way of him being tone deaf to certain situations. He felt like, he would listen to a lot of people, but ultimately did what he wanted to do. And I think that probably could have gotten in the way of that because he was so smart. He would read a lot and felt that he really understood what was going on. And sometimes I think having a different approach of saying, I really don't know anything about this. Maybe I need to rely more on what other experts are saying. It's not to say that he dismissed those experts, but I think it was easier for him sometimes to just do what he thought was the right thing to do.
During your time at CNN, I was one of your biggest fans. I watched you whenever I had the opportunity. And I remember one time we would try to meet, you and I would try to meet often. We would meet for dinner, say at Old Ebbitt's Grill, and I walked you back to the White House and you showed your ID and you got to go into the White House gate, onto the White House grounds, and you turned around and kind of looked at me and winked. And I laughed and I hearkened back to our days in college where one time we ran out of gas. We only had like 65 cents between us to pay for gas in my pickup truck. But do you remember the first time you met me at the campus radio station in Chattanooga, Tennessee?
I do, actually. I remember walking you were behind the glass, I think, at the master control area there in the studio. And I remember seeing you there and I was in awe because you were the upperclassmen and you were the guys who had the pipes, you had been running those stations. It's amazing how they gave so much. I mean, it was a student run station, but it wasn't just, a low power, do whatever you want. It was a real professional radio station. And you guys were the ones who were well known as the DJs or announcers on the station. And I remember looking up to you when I first walked in and thinking, that's what I want to do. I
was the host of the morning radio show. Never saw any Arbitron ratings, but it was a lot of fun.
64,000 watts of radiated power.
UIN Chattanooga.
That's right.
So I'm obviously very proud of you and your accomplishments. And one of the things I appreciate about you, Dan, and I've said this to some personal friends, is you haven't changed. Going from the campus radio station where we were living, probably on less than $10,000 a year to flying an Air Force One, you're the same guy I knew. That's not the case for a lot of people that get into the trappings of Washington, D.C., is it?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, part of it is that you get sucked into this notion that you're bigger and better than who you were. And people are telling you, people are wanting your autograph. People, when you go on the trail out there and people recognize you, they want to take photos with you. You're having lunch with President Obama and other senior advisors, both at the White House or when you're traveling. You have people's cell phone numbers these are the movers and the shakers, on Capitol Hill or within the White House. And so it's hard not to kind of start thinking more of yourself because with every year that you spend within that bubble and with every promotion that you get, it's almost as if you are moving beyond where you started, right? And it's like, I was a child then, I have to grow up. I have to be, a little bit more serious. I have to carry myself a different way. After all, I'm going to these special A-list or B-list or whatever parties that are happening. For me, I've never bought into it. I always look at these opportunities as great journalism, journalism endeavors. That's whether you're out there on the street covering the cop beat or whether you're covering the White House. Certainly one pays more than the other and is more high profile. But at the end of the day, it's the same job. You're a reporter and you can't get too close to your sources and you can't believe that you are part of that, but whatever that is, right? You still have to separate yourself from it. And then realize that what people are telling you, they're only telling you those things because of what your position is. When you're no longer in that position, a lot of those friendships, a lot of those quote unquote friendships or relationships go away. And so the more that you understand that going into it, the more humble I think it will keep you throughout.
Well, I always say, and of course this was a little bit of bias as friends, as you were one of the last great journalists. How has news journalism or the news media changed in the last decade?
Well, certainly, it's even less than the last decade, really. I think, for the last 4 years, you've really seen a different look for, reporters, certainly those who are covering politics, covering Washington. And part of that, I think, is in reaction to the toxic nature, right? When you have, not that we're having a partisan discussion here or anything, but I think just from a purely human standpoint, this was a president who was often attacking the media. Whether you believe that's right or wrong, that was something the president did. And so it was, reporters have never been high on that list for the most popular jobs. I think we're on that list, least popular list with, I think, lawyers and used car salesmen. And so it's always been, those reporters kind of thing, but it really has ramped up in the last 4 to 5 years. And so that then, you could react in two ways. One, you could just keep your head down and cover stories and cover them the way you always have. Or you can say, forget that. If they're throwing stones at me, I'm going to throw stones and more back at them. And I think that's what we're seeing is some of that necessary? Yes. I mean, we were always very cautious about calling what a politician said a lie, right? We would always say it was untruths or they were twisting the truth. There were all kinds we would always twist ourselves into a pretzel to come up with a different way of saying something other than lie, right? But it's different now because if someone's lying and they lie all the time, you can't dance around it that often. And so you find correspondents calling people out for lying. And then you find correspondents just flat out, calling people names because they're being called names. And so I think that's different. It's a more confrontational kind of reporting that you see. And I hope that perhaps now things will settle down a bit. Is it ever going to go back to what it was before? I don't think so. But I hope things will settle down a little bit and lean more towards some of the traditional ways of covering news. I would try to stick as much as possible to the news itself, as much as possible to the traditional ways of covering the news. I think once you start putting yourself in the middle of these daily battles with politicians, then it becomes a little harder for you to, at least from the parent standpoint, to feel like you're not, some liberal person going after a conservative president or the other way around. And so I think that the more that you can keep it to covering the story and the facts and how the facts are playing out, I think that the better journalism and less of that bias that you'll see in the reporting, at least the perception of that. President Reagan understood the value of reporters and those who covered him. Even President Bush, who was closer to reporters perhaps than any other president that I can recall, where he would
John F. Kennedy.
Right. Well, he would take reporters out on sort of modern day, take reporters out on or producers on bike rides, and they would, hang out with him. And it wasn't that they were necessarily looking for buddies, have this buddy system there with the president or anything. But I think the president, having grown up in the White House, understood politics, understood the role of the media. He knew how he was being portrayed, and he was trying to show them a different side. Not that they were necessarily going to buy into it, but at least he felt like he could at least give them something to think about when they were reporting on him. I was like, wait a minute, I hung out with him on this bike ride, and this, I think, is what was in his mind when he was saying this. So it was it's an understanding, and it's a certain respect that politicians have for reporters. That doesn't mean there can't be tension. That doesn't mean there can't be tough reporting, but that respect, you can certainly see it. And I think that's what you're referring to, where Sam Donaldson later, could have that, talk about and get that sense that they didn't hate each other, right? They were just playing or doing their jobs.
Building bridges instead of burning bridges.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about tomorrow, the 59th inaugural. We're going to have the President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, the 46th President of the United States, and I already have the portrait ready. And we'll hang it up here in my library of U.S. presidents as we continue to celebrate the presidency and the Constitution, which I always call the greatest governing document ever devised by humankind. So an exciting day. I would say, even for those who didn't vote Democrat or didn't vote Joe Biden, it is a peaceful transfer of power. A little rough last week, but I think we got through that. But as a White House correspondent, you had a chance to brush elbows and get to know former Vice President Joe Biden and his wife, Jill. Tell me what you know about our incoming president.
Right. So, even before I got to know him, my wife, and you know her, Cindy had covered him back when she started out her career as a reporter in Delaware. And, in those old school days, you would spend time, with a politician, go to a coffee house, once a week or once a month to sit down and talk about what was going on in government, and for them to kind of provide you with insights as the reporter. And so my wife knew him, had spent a lot of time with him as a reporter. So, flash forward to many years later, and I'm covering the White House, and certainly the focus was most often on President Obama and other administration officials. But I did have contact from time to time with the vice president. He would have these, it was a minor controversy. The vice president would have these beach parties at his home, a time for people who covered the Washington to come with their families onto the Naval Observatory campus there and spend a day. The kids would run around. In fact, there's a picture out there, a couple of pictures out there on the web of my son running around with a giant super soaker chasing the incoming first lady and the incoming president around, and he got to know them. But I remember there was this conversation that we had. It's like, just sitting there, and he always gets up real close when he's talking to you. And I said, this is wonderful. This is a great opportunity for us, myself, my family, and others to get to know you outside of the suit and tie. But this is I'm also a reporter, and so just heads up, and this, if anything ever comes up here, we're still going to be asking those tough questions. It's not as if this party absolves him of any kind of criticism that we might have. But I had a chance of traveling to Iraq with the vice president, and I remember him coming back and sitting. In fact, someone just posted a photo last week, I believe it was, of that flight. He came back and he was sitting on the arm of the seat in front, and we were just talking for about 45 minutes. And when he talks, he kind of punches you in the arm when he needs to make a point. But Joe Biden, I don't think he is what most people think. This Sleepy Joe tag that President Trump tried to put on him, and that some people still think of him as. Certainly, he's older than when I was covering him, but he has a very strong personality. He's has a little bit of a temper. He's not a sleepy Joe by any imagination, but he's someone who really, I think, the forte of someone like a Biden is he has come up through a system that was built on compromise. Now, compromise can be a bad thing, but you need compromise in order for anything to happen. And so, he has had a lot of experience working with Mitch McConnell. We'll see how that will translate to him now as being president versus, being either the vice president or as a senator. But he has a lot of experience dealing with lawmakers, and I think that's going to come in a big way to potentially make some movements on a whole host of fronts in his administration.
He's a great retail politician, taking Amtrak back and forth between Washington and Wilmington, Delaware. I may have underestimated the president back during the incoming president, back during the campaign. I made a point privately that I thought Joe Biden was a perfect fit for United States senator because you're 1 out of 100. I never thought that he was built to be 1 out of 1, the president. But I will say this, and you've heard me say this before, is one of the greatest attributes a president could have is to be underestimated. Ronald Reagan, Harry Truman, Abraham Lincoln were underestimated. So I think, as patriotic Americans, we should wish the new president well and wish success for America and healing. It's obviously a tall order to try to heal the country at this time. Not the first time we've been divided.
Right. No, look, there's a whole host of things that this president has to do, not only into dealing with things that were undone, but sort of moving beyond that and moving forward. But while as a tall order of all of this long list of things that need to be done and addressed, I don't know that it's going to be as difficult for the president as some people might think. And partly it's because, the expectation is that he walks in there and that there's no immediate controversy, that occurs, right? So boring is good. I do think that there are a lot of Americans out there who just want things to kind of go back to as normal as they can, right? And is he going to deliver a great speech like President Obama with the same kind of presence that President Obama has? No, he's not going to do that. But you know what? You may remember some of his speeches and put them way up there on the list because they're just normal, right? And I think that's what a lot of people are looking forward to. And so I don't think, there's a lot of pressure for him to accomplish a lot of things, but I don't think, I think he can get a lot of applause for just doing some basic normal things because we haven't felt and seen a lot of that in a while.
The country is so divided right now. Let's talk about our friendship and our mutual friend, Mark from Dallas. If you draw a line in the sand, I fall on the right side of politics. Our friend Mark falls on the left side. You're kind of in the middle. And we've had some really heated discussions about politics before. You're kind of in the middle as a referee between Mark and I. But at the end of the day, Dan, we're great friends. We've had this friendship now for 37 plus years, and we hug each other and drink a glass of wine and go on our way. Why can't other people do that? And what can we do to try to unify us?
Yeah, it's hard to not understand how people can't sit down and have a conversation and disagree, but still have, still talk about things and not hate each other. You pointed out correctly that I try to be, somewhere in the middle. And by that, I mean that I don't vote by party, I vote by people, right? And so sometimes that may be a Republican and other times it may be a Democrat. I hate it when people try to sort of put me into this box of saying, he's a minority, so he has to be this, all the way to the left, right? There are certain issues that are close to my heart, and those are issues that I vote on. There are other issues that aren't as important to me, and they may fall, in the ranks of Democrats. It may fall in the ranks of Republicans. And so, I like this friendship that we have, where we have two extremes and then Dan in the middle. And we've always been able to have conversation. I hope that. So your question is how do we get back to that? And I don't know that I have the answer. I mean, it has to be neighbors who maybe haven't spoken to each other for the last 4 years. Say, this is crazy. We can't.
Fathers and daughters.
Or family, right? It could be family members. It could be husbands and wives. I've heard, and I don't know, anecdotally, there are these stories of divorces happening, right? Because one was a rabid supporter of Trump and the other one wasn't, right? Whether that's true or not, what we need to do is individually, people need to make an effort in this year to step out of some of the toxic relationships and the toxic environment that we've had and just test the waters, See if you can talk to someone about something on the other side of the aisle and see what their reaction is. I think, first of all, you have to let go of what it is that you've been hanging on to and give them something for them to also sort of let go of what they've been hanging on to. And so I think it begins with, so let's take, for example, President Trump, right? It's hard to have a conversation with someone about it because, people either hate him or they like him, but there's hardly anyone that's kind of in the middle. But I think where you can start the conversation is with an admission that there are some things that he did from a policy standpoint. Now, you could argue whether he knew he was doing it or not, and he was just throwing things at the wall. But from a policy perspective, if you can say, this is something, I don't like him as a human being, I don't like the things he says, but these are some things that I think he did or that happened while he was president that I'll give him credit for, okay? Someone who totally hates him should be able to say something like that. When you say something like that, that opens the door for the person who is the diehard Trump supporter to now look across the aisle and say, okay, here's what I'll give you. Here's what Barack Obama did, or here's what I hope Vice President, incoming President Biden will do. You have to find little pieces and start working sort of, from a grassroots level, neighbor and neighbor, family member and family member. And only then will it rise to the top where there's national conversation that can happen again, where it's not just name calling and death threats.
I've been blessed to have friends that are non-white, that don't look like me and don't think like me, and it's made my life richer. Speaking of that, one of the things I appreciate about our friendship is learning some of the stories growing up that you share with me about racial inequity. What was it like as a journalist? Any issues or obstacles as a Black journalist?
Well, there are always issues and obstacles, and I'll take you back to the very beginning. One of my early TV jobs when I was working in Chattanooga, and I went out to a town. I won't say the name of it because it might not be like that now.
Does it start with a letter?
No, we're beyond that. But I went out to.
Does it start with a letter X?
Yeah. And so we went outside of Chattanooga. We were covering a story, and I was going door to door, and someone came to a door with a gun and told me to get off their porch. And it was, they told me why I needed to get off that porch. I remember my photographer, who was sitting in the car at the time. He was a nervous kind of guy and just didn't like, coming up to the door and knocking on doors and that kind of thing with me. But he said, look, I'll knock on doors. We were trying to get some information. He said, I'll go and knock on the doors first and sort of break the ice. We understood that it just wasn't safe for me as an African-American to just be knocking on some of these doors in this particular area. There was another time too, and this wasn't in my reporting capacity, but just a weekend, not far from that area, actually, there was a place of swimming hole. We would go way back into the woods to go swimming. And I remember we'd walk into a gentleman, if we want to even go that far as calling him that, had a gun and clearly let me know that someone who looked like me shouldn't pass where I was standing, that I should turn around and go back. This happened in this was early 90s when this was happening. So late 80s, early 90s. And so, I've seen that. And some of it, some of the stuff that happens a little bit more subtle. It takes place, whether it's inside your own newsroom or whether it's with sources that you're dealing with or whatever it may be. There are always things that, race is behind it. But one of the things that I remember telling myself at a very young age is that I'm not going to worry and let what someone else thinks of me define me or dictate what I do. And so if I can't change, the situation in their minds, then I'm just sort of pushing forward. I'm doing my job, right? You don't like me? Okay, fine, get out of the way. And I know some can see it as a burden sometime, where, I can't do this, I can't do that because of the color of my skin. I've always tried. It's not that I forget about it. It's not that I don't think about it. It's not that I don't realize what's going on. I just don't obsess about it, right? I don't let it, paralyze me and keep me from doing what I need to do.
And that's the Dan Lothian that I know now for 37 years. Hey, let's do a little plug for the kids. Your son, Blake, and your daughter, Abby. My daughter is Abigail. Your daughter is Abigail. They have the same initials, ARL. First, tell us what's going on with Abby. She's a runner. And then let's a quick plug for Blake, up and coming NASCAR driver.
That's right. Well, as you know, and a lot of athletes out there, certainly elite athletes, are having a tough time, doing races, training, and all of that because of COVID. And so that challenge also has been for my daughter, who made it to the Junior Olympics 2 years in a row.
Okay. Finally, before we wrap up, tell us about your son Blake and his initiative with NASCAR and their Youth for Diversity program.
Yeah, so he's a development driver. He's been part of the program for a couple of years, and working to move up through the ranks, starting off with the Legend car for the last couple of years at the Charlotte Motor Speedway and at other racetracks across the South. And then now moving up in the coming season, and we'll be making announcements in the coming weeks about a new team that he will be going to. He's moving up the ranks to drive the bigger stock car with the ultimate goal of making it to one of the three top national leagues, if you will. There's a Truck Series, there's the Xfinity Series, and then the Cup Series. He wants to make it all the way to the top, but certainly wants to make it to the Truck Series as an entry into the national level. And so excited about his passion. One of the things people always ask me, well, how'd your kids get in? Running, I've been doing running, so there's some connection there. racing, had no connection whatsoever to it, and frankly didn't like it. I've come to really appreciate the sport. I've come to understand it. But the big thing is you want your kids, if you sit down, you have a conversation with your kids, it shouldn't be about, oh, I want you to grow up and be a doctor or a lawyer and make lots of money. Now, if they want to do that, that's great. Or if they just want to make money, that's great, right? But I think that it should start, the conversation should start with, what are you passionate about, right? Yep. Not everybody can find out what they're passionate about at a young age or at an older age. But it makes life a lot easier if you're waking up every morning and doing something that you're passionate about. It doesn't mean that you love it every day, but when you're passionate about it, it makes you want to keep trying harder and harder. You're not giving up as easily because you really love it. And so, they discovered their passion. One is running, the other one is driving and racing, and we'll see how far they go.
Well, I've been to a couple of races. I'm a proud sponsor.
That's right. No, it's great. And, I'm glad you and I, what I like is that this friendship, we haven't really had any moments. There've been a few years here or there that maybe we didn't connect as often as we do now. But, since we were young kids, really, we've been in touch, and it's great. These are the kind of friendships that I really appreciate, because in life, especially going back to what you asked at the beginning of this conversation about, these reporters who really change who they are, right? They sort of buy into this thing of who they are. And I think part of that too is that maybe they aren't as connected to some of those original friends that they had. They got their new friends that came along. But I've always appreciated those friends who were with me in elementary school or in high school or in college. I mean, my richest collection of friends all came from there. No. And only a few friends that I picked up after I graduated from grad school.
I cherish our friendship. You're my top three closest friends, and I'm a better man because of you.
Ditto for me as well.
Well, thank you, Dan, for taking the time to talk with us, and we wish new president well as he's inaugurated tomorrow, and we'll just pray for healing in our country.
Yeah, and I think my only bit of advice is let's stop the name calling, right? If you don't like something about the president from a policy issue, let's have that conversation. If you just say, I just hate him because I hate him, that's not a conversation to have. Let's try to dial down the temperature and see where it leads us.
Let's have a conversation and find out that we probably have more that we're in agreement on than we're in disagreement on.
That's so true. So true.
Right. Thanks again, Dan. Have a great day.
Okay, take care.
You've been watching Lumley Live. History and politics. Conversations that make you think, listen, and learn. Lumley Live is a production of POTUS America. Made in the USA.